All right. So chapter 3.3, talking about completing the square. Basically what this section is going to be talking about is when you're going to need to do this special technique called completing the square. It's basically when you want to factor, but all the methods we talked about in the last video won't work. So we need to do a special cheat, essentially. And it's also only when we're dealing with equations. Okay? I want to show you the middle one first. So if I rearrange the equation so it looks like this, I can't actually factor it. I can try, but what are the factors of -2? Well, you have like 1 and 2, and those don't add up to 4. So it doesn't actually work. So we have to do another strategy. I'm going to show you first in this one because it'll make a little bit more sense what we're talking about. So when we're trying to solve this one's a little easier. I'm going to try and rearrange and isolate. 2x squared equals, I'm going to move that 48, divide both sides by 2. Okay, now I need x by itself. I gotta get rid of the x, so I square root it, and I get x is equal to the square root of 24. Be careful, because we actually forgot something. We need to say plus minus. Because the idea is, when we square root this, it could actually give me x is equal to positive square root 24, or x is equal to negative square root 24. This makes a lot of sense, because first of all, when you square root a number, you can get a positive or a negative. Because let's say, for example, square root of 4 equals 2, or -2, because -2 times -2 is 4. 2 times 2 is 4. Okay, so we're always going to get a positive negative when we square root. This also makes sense because the rule we talked about last time, which is when we're dealing with exponent 2, we're going to get 2 answers. And in this case, we got 2 answers. Okay? This basic idea of getting plus minus when we deal with square root is going to be really important when we do the harder questions. So with that out of the way, let's do this. Well, that's not what I wanted. There we go. Okay, with that out of the way, let's do the tougher ones. The completing the square method is kind of weird to think about. The idea is we're going to create a perfect square trinomial. Perfect square trinomial is essentially something that factors into something like this. Because if we had this equation written like this, we can actually solve it because we can square root. So a perfect square trinomial, if we expanded it out, would look like this. Let's do 3. 3 is better. It's easier to see. Okay, there's always a square, perfect square on both sides, and then the middle term is equal to the square root of c times 2. You don't need to memorize this, honestly. I'm going to show you the strategy of how to break it down, but essentially we're trying to create this. That is our goal, to create this using this. Okay, so let me show you with an example, and then we'll do another example that's harder. In this one, I'm going to do x squared plus 4x. The equal to we can actually just leave on that side. I'm going to do this method I call sash. It's sash written upside down, okay? The first thing we're going to do is half. We are going to take that b term, that term right there, and we're going to divide it by 2. Okay? So 4 divided by 2, that's 2. Then what we're going to do is we're going to square it. We're going to square that number. Then we're going to add it and subtract it. So I'm going to write plus 2 squared minus 2 squared. The reason we did this is because, as you know, with equations, you can't just add numbers. But if I add and subtract the exact same thing, I'm really just adding 0, which means I'm not changing it. This is important because these terms right here, because we did that positive square, we can actually factor that and it becomes this. Okay, and just to prove it to you, let's expand this out. It gives you x squared plus 2 plus 2, 4x plus 4, which is exactly what this is, because 2 squared is 4. So we changed this whole trinomial into this perfect square. Okay, this is going to be really important. This, we're just going to leave as it is, so it'll become minus 4 equals 2. I'm going to move it to the other side. X plus 2 all squared equals -2. -2? Sorry. Silly. 6 equals 6. Okay, so now I'm going to solve, so I need to square root both sides. So I get x plus 2 is equal to square root of 6 plus minus. Okay, then I'm going to move the 2 over and get my 2 answers. X equals -2 plus root 6, or x equals -2 minus root 6. So some teachers would be okay if you write this. It's up to you. You decide. You figure out what makes most sense to you. The other thing is that in some textbooks, I wrote my -2 squared here. Some will tell you to write it here as +2 squared. I don't really care what you do, again, as long as it makes sense to you. I like writing it on this side because when we're going to do stuff in a future unit for graphing, it actually helps to have it on the same side. But it's up to you. Okay? That was a lot of information really fast. We're going to go through another example. I want to walk through this one more time. Okay? We created the perfect square trinomial by creating these two new terms. We used the SASH method, and because of that, we were able to create this perfect square trinomial and then factor it, and then we just solved the rest of it. Let's do the same thing. I'm going to zoom out so you can see both if you need to. We're going to do the same thing over on this side with this equation. So again, try and factor first. I can't factor this because if I do -4, the factors of -4 are this. None of them add up to -9, so it doesn't work. But there are possible factors. So let's do it. I'm going to work with these two, and I'm going to sash it. I'm going to sash this -9. So I need to think of half it, square it, add it, subtract it. So x squared minus 9x. Then I'm going to half of -9. You can decide to do decimals or fractions. It's up to you. If it's going to be a improper, like a decimal that doesn't terminate, you might want to leave it as a fraction. This one's going to be 4.5, so it's not as bad. So I'm going to add 4.5 squared and subtract 4.5 squared. Okay? Then I got my -4 equals 0. That's it. This is now my perfect square trinomial. It's going to become x minus 4.5 squared. You'll notice this time it was a minus. That's because this was negative. In the last one we did, we had a positive here. In this one, it was a negative. Just be careful. That's going to dictate the sign that you use inside your bracket. Okay? So we got that. Awesome. Let's deal with the rest. I'm actually going to expand this out. So it's going to give me negative 22.25. Let me double check that. Sorry, 20.25. Minus 4 equals 0. I'm going to collect those and move them to the other side. So we get x minus 4.5 squared equals positive 24.25. Cool. Now I'm going to square root both sides, and you get x minus 4.5 equals plus minus square root 24.25. And then, again, move that over to the other side. So you isolate x equals 4.5 plus minus square root 24.25. So we have our two answers because we had the plus minus. That's how you deal with these questions. This completing the square thing is not going away. Please do not think that you can ignore it like you can with some concepts that you do in math courses. This will stay for the next 3 units and for a lot in your future of math. You need to know how completing the square works. You need to practice it until you can do it in your sleep. I don't usually like talking about shortcuts and things you memorize like SASH, but you need to figure out a way that you can know how to do this inside and out in a second when you get this type of question, because it is so important for the next 3 units. Sorry for preaching. That's the end of the video. Rewatch it and practice. That's it.